Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. You are with the OSBA Pupil Transportation Drop-in, another one of our every other week sessions. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have a number of guest presenters working with us today. Hopefully you can all see my screen. And this conference is being recorded, so we'll get the recording up on our website as soon as it processes later today. The PowerPoint has already been posted, so it is up and available on the website. And well, let me back up for just a second here. For those of you that have not accessed the website before for these documents, you need to go to Ohio School Boards Association, log in, and then click on Transportation Services. Once you get to that section of our page, go ahead and scroll down to the Transportation News Update. And on that page, you will see not only copies of all the statewide emails we sent out on Pupil Transportation News, but you'll see the recordings and the PowerPoints from this series of drop-in sessions that we've been doing. All right. So we have a lot of folks on here today. We've got 93 folks logged in already, and we've got 138 that registered. So your microphones are turned off. Doug is monitoring the chat field, so if you have questions, put them in there. If there are things that we need to discuss, that I need to discuss verbally, he will pass those on to me, and we'll do that. And then we'll post a summary of the questions and answers when we're done with the meeting. Once again, in order to manage Zoom security, we do need you to put your proper name, your full name, into your window when you log on. And there's a few folks that have come in without their full names. Unfortunately, we will have to remove you in the next 10 minutes. So please go ahead and get your names in there. And that way we know who's with us today. All right. Will Schwartz is with us. Let me get Will's microphone turned off. Will, you should be good to go here.
He just came back to the waiting room. I just let him back in.
Okay. Will?
Yes, sorry about that.
That's all right. Good morning, and thanks for helping us out here. I've got
of course.
two slides up on the window for you.
Oh, very good. So Senate Bill 319 is a bill that was filed and introduced very recently, sponsored by Senator Matt Huffman from Lima, Ohio, and Allen County. And there's a lot of education provisions in this bill. It's kind of being considered as the education and relief bill for the 2021 school year, to provide districts and schools the flexibility and relief and other measures necessary for a return to school for next school year, so that teachers and kids can teach and learn in safe and successful ways. And so one of the provisions does deal with transportation. The bill had a first hearing yesterday in the Senate Education Committee. It's up for a second hearing today, this afternoon. Well, I can't even remember the time off the top of my head right now. It's a busy time to legislature, but there are a lot of amendments that are going to be considered for the bill today, some of which do include transportation changes. But the one provision that's in the bill right now would require for the 2021 school year, the Ohio Department of Education to develop an online driver training program that can be accomplished within 30 days and would satisfy the classroom portion of the pre-service training and the annual bus driver in-service training. And then the bill does specify that the on-the-bus training for drivers is still to continue in an in-person on the bus format. and then I do want to bring to everyone's attention kind of some communications that has gone behind the scenes among interested parties on this matter. This bill, when it was introduced and kind of when the provision was kind of circulated around for discussion, recommendations, has drawn a significant amount of conversation focused on the bus driver training portion being delivered in an online format. There was a communication that was sent out that had some information that was not that contained some falsehoods about OSBA as an association and the services that we provide, our goal and intent behind this provision. To set the record straight, OSBA is a non-profit association, and we've got no interest in providing driver training services. Our intent at pursuing this provision was to provide, a more efficient way, an additional tool for folks who want to become bus drivers or, renew, in-service opportunities in a way that is not only in person, but can be delivered online. We have no intent, nor do we want to be a part of taking over this training. We know the trainings that are provided right now are of high quality and done by professionals. And it's our intent that continues as such. And so, the provision in the bill, as well as the others that we provided the legislators that we're hoping are included in the bill thereafter, are ways to not only address, the bus driver shortage, but to provide, new and innovative ways to expand, our pool of drivers, as well as to provide flexibility and relief to our transportation departments as they take care of transporting our kids, delivering meals, things like that in the next school year. Meanwhile, there is another bill that was just introduced and filed by Senator Matt Huffman. And this bill has kind of two key provisions in it. And the first is that it requires public and private schools to decide whether or not to be open for instruction in the upcoming 2021 school year. And so, that's kind of, generally you've already had that authority to decide on your own. What the departure or the new kind of issue in the bill is that it has a provision that prohibits any other public official, so not a school district official, a board, or a superintendent, if delegated that authority by the Board of Education, any other public official from closing schools in that particular school year. So you might be thinking the director of health. And I think that's very much part of the intent behind this provision. Senator Huffman is presenting sponsored testimony on this bill today. We expect it to be seriously considered by the Senate in terms of emergency legislation to address the 2021 school year. And we are currently evaluating both the bill and its impact on school districts and our members currently. But those are two things we wanted to make you aware of. Keep in contact with us about the transportation provisions that hopefully will be adopted by the committee today. There are some added amendments that we've been working on with legislators and staff in the Senate and in the House to address, the unique challenges facing our transportation departments across the state.
Thanks, Will. In the last couple of meetings, we've reviewed a number of other bills that were proposed, and Will keeps me updated on this stuff and the activity on them. And if you were to look through the PowerPoints from the last couple of meetings, you'll see a number of House bills out there. Will, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is most of those have not made it into the hearing status yet, and they're just kind of sitting in committee. Is that correct?
Pete, that's correct. I believe only one, I believe it's the protective barriers bill, has received a first hearing over in the House. Most of the others have not, but the content of these bills are being shared as individual amendments to bills that are vehicles for being passed, hopefully this week or next week. And so, yeah, we're trying to make sure that the important contents in those pieces of legislation are strongly considered.
Great, thanks, Will. If any of you have other questions about legislation or things that you've heard and you want clarity on them, feel free to either put a note in the chat or you can send an email directly to me or to Doug or to Will, and we'll be happy to help you understand what's going on inside the State House. Will, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Update you on a couple of current events, some news that we've collected here in the last couple of days. Just yesterday, the Ohio BMV reported that they are reopening a number of their driver testing stations, not all of them, but a number of them. So they're opening those on June the 12th. You do have to make an appointment in advance. I think that's SOP. We're all used to that. The locations that they've identified as opening are in Findlay, Bedford, Columbus, Newark, Jackson, and Cincinnati. If you have any questions about that or want to know any additional information, I would encourage you to contact the Ohio BMV directly. And we also got an update from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And many of you may recall that they had earlier given us a waiver on CDL renewals. And so any of your drivers whose CDL expired from mid-March on, they actually have until later this fall to get those CDLs renewed. What they've also announced is they've issued a pre-employment testing waiver. So you have to read this one a little bit carefully. As you all know, one of the things that you're required to do for your CDL drivers is pre-employment testing. And what they have done is modified who has to be tested. In essence, what they're saying is that if you propose to hire someone and they have been tested somewhere else in the last 90 days, you can go ahead and allow them to start work. That's different. It used to just be a 30-day window. I won't opine on whether that's of value to you or not, but at the very least, it's nice to see that the FMCSA is continuing to keep track of what's going on in the field, so that we can get new drivers onto the table. I think all of us are kind of accepting of the fact that we're going to have a driver shortage this fall, and that's going to be a tough thing to manage. And so FMCSA is starting to show us some movement there. So before I move on and away from bills and legislation, we did get a question from one of our participants asking about putting plexiglass in a van. So the bill that was introduced deals with barriers and equipment in buses. There is no regulatory control in Ohio and administrative code as it pertains to vans. So if you wanted to put plexiglass in a van, or if you wanted to put partitions on a seat in a van, there is nothing on the books right now that regulates that. So you'll be able to do pretty much your own thing. Another question that's been asked with regard to driver equipment is, will you be able to use face shields while driving, providing they're clear and they pose no blind spots? Again, there is nothing in code that prevents you from doing that. One of the legislative proposals that we've offered to the Senate that Will and the team are working on is we want to get some language into law that says clearly that as a district, you're allowed to give your drivers whatever personal protective equipment you feel is appropriate. If those are face shields, that's fine. Obviously, there's some concern with face shields. They have the potential of creating distortion, if you will. So it's just something to be aware of. All right, moving on. I want to tell you about something that started off 2 weeks ago. I'm very excited about it. We've had great response from the field. 3-4 weeks ago, folks started sending emails to us at OSBA saying, there's not much guidance out there for transportation. Everything we see is a suggestion. Nothing's really concrete. And so we had supervisors saying, let's put together a task force. So we've done that. And we put out an open invitation not too long ago. I think some of you may remember seeing that. Everybody that responded to that was given an invitation to join with us. And the bottom line is we have 29 school professionals that are working together as a transportation task force. We've had 2 total task force meetings. Within the task force, we have subdivided into a number of groups. And so we have teams of supervisors looking at all of the different subjects that you see listed on this page. We're looking at routing and routing impacts, staff training, and actually staff training is now, after our Monday meeting, expanded so that staff training is also going to include student training and parent training. We're going to look at bus stop procedures, cleaning and sanitizing, exposure management, how to protect the transportation office, and finally bus equipment. So we've got groups working hard on all those things. They're researching all the different recommendations, guidances, and procedures that are being developed around the country. And so what are we going to do with this? Well, the goal, actually the mission, if you will, is for a group of your peers to research, review, collaborate, and then use their collective experience to develop sound guidance for those of us in the field, for those of you, I should say, in the field that are providing transportation services. What we want to do is give something to you that's valuable. So we're going to draft and then maintain a guidance document comprised of best practices and considerations that will help Ohio school districts. And so I think it's important to point out here that this is not going to be a written, posted, and done deal. This is going to be, this committee will continue to review and maintain, because we know the changes continue to happen in this market with everything that's going on. And if any of you are following the CDC guidelines, you might have noticed that almost on a weekly basis, CDC is changing what they say. You know, the latest confusion among CDC is they're not sure whether the virus can be transmitted by surface infection or not. So, you know, it's interesting, all that impacts how much we have to worry about sanitizing and everything else. So before I drop in, here's another question. Somebody asked about payment in lieu of. For those of you that have families that are on the payment in lieu of program from last year, it is appropriate for you to prorate the amount you're paying those parents. ODE has made the same announcement, and they're saying essentially the same thing that we are. Payment in lieu of gets paid to parents based on the days their children attend school. So of the 180, right off the bat, you want to deduct the 54 days that schools were closed because of the governor's order last year. And then many of our districts also do an attendance check with their non-publics. So you can prorate, and you should prorate, the amount that you pay those parents for payment in lieu of. So moving on with the task force, they're doing really good work, and it was really exciting to listen to the supervisors talk and report out on their subgroup work on Monday. How are we going to get this information to you? We're going to create a dedicated web page. It'll be part of the OSBA web presence, and it will contain the resources and the recommendations of the task force. And so we're going to be getting that up here, hopefully within the next couple of days. We'll create the page, and then we'll start populating it as the recommendations are formulated by our teams. And we'll also create a library on there. So if there's things that would be of use to you, we'll put them up there so you can look at it. And again, for those of you following the national news, California came out with their guidance for their schools just within the last day and a half. So we'll be taking a look at that. There's guidances popping up all over the country. And our goal is going to be, let's get these things in place so that you can use them. So what I would like to do now is I'm going to ask one of our subgroups to tell you a little bit about what they're doing. So Sheila Dickowitz is with us. Sheila and Heidi and Alicia are working together on a subgroup dealing with exposure management. As soon as I get Sheila's microphone undone here. Sheila, are you with us?
I am.
Great. So Sheila and her team have been looking at exposure management, and I was thinking about this drop-in session yesterday and what to share with you. And I thought, some of the work these folks are doing is so good that I don't want to wait until we have it written and published. So I've asked Sheila on behalf of her team to share with you some of the information she shared with the task force on Monday. So Sheila, the floor is yours, and I'll click through these slides here when you tell me to click.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We broke our task group into 4 different sections. The section that for exposure management that I worked on was communication and school policies. We all agreed that communication is going to be a huge, and it's been a huge issue with both receiving and getting information. So Pete and Ohio School Boards Association, we're extremely grateful that you're doing this because this is exactly what we need. And looking at exposure management, I wanted to see the data and see exactly who's been the most at risk. And I was very surprised to see the numbers in the 20 to 70 have really, they've gone way higher than when I had previously looked. So what I'm thinking and what I'm seeing is that our students are actually the least at-risk group. However, our drivers and bus aides are the highest. Part of the concerns when I looked on the Ohio Department of Health, when we're looking at symptoms, they're saying you may have COVID-19 if you have one or both symptoms: cough, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, or at least 2 symptoms: fever, chills, repeated shaking with chills, muscle pain, headache, or sore throat. My concern is that the COVID symptoms listed, they're pretty broad and they mirror a lot of common illnesses such as cough, headache, and sore throat. So I think that's going to be another thing that we're really going to have to look at, because half our staff, could have a cough, a fever, and a headache multiple days during the school year, as well as our students. Pete, if you can go to the next slide. So we talked about district communication and possible policies that would need to be in place. We felt that staff professional development regarding COVID symptoms and signs of illness is going to be paramount. PD should include the policies and procedures for PPE, to mask or not to mask. That is the question. I don't know, looking at drivers, that's going to be a decision that I believe the districts are going to have to make. And I don't know about any of you, but if you've driven wearing a mask and you have sunglasses or glasses, they fog up pretty quickly. The same with the face shield. So we're going to need some guidance on that. But our professional development, the hygiene, the hand washing, not touching the face, that's huge. Social distancing, common areas, and disinfecting our school bus. Procedures in place for staff, taking temperatures at home and when arriving to work. Staff should be aware of their normal temperature and documentation of the temperature. I know we're doing that in our district. We have the touchless temperature, so they can take it as soon as they get to work, and then there's a Google Doc that they have to log their temperature. And then procedures in place in the event a staff member exhibits signs of illness on the school bus. We're going to need to have a plan or a procedure in place for the district to communicate with staff and parents. Okay, next slide. So in the procedures in place in the event a student exhibits signs of illness on a school bus, like I was talking before about the symptoms that are common to just regular childhood illness, I don't feel our drivers, I think it needs to be clear that our drivers are not responsible for distinguishing between COVID and other common illnesses. We're going to need to have a plan in place for the school staff or a nurse to receive a student with symptoms off a bus. I know that we have sick kids get on a bus all the time. That's where we're going to really need to communicate to staff and parents not to send their students to school if they're showing any signs, and a plan in place that if a student becomes ill during the day, a parent must come pick them up, that they are not putting them on the school bus. Also, procedures in place for disinfecting of common areas, wipes or gloves, even at a fuel tank upon entering the building, and common high-touch areas. As far as with parents and guardians, I really think it's going to be important as far as communication. In July, a parent survey, I know we did one in Kirtland in June, and I had about 50-60% of parents saying that they would send their children to school and they would let them ride the bus. I think that number is going to be higher come July after these parents have had these kids home since March. But I think we need to know that so that we are, if we're going to be routing 26 kids on a bus, we know what that really looks like. We also are going to need information on health and safety measures for students, PPE, masks at the bus stop, on the bus, information on the health and safety measures the district is taking to ensure students can return to the school building. Parents are really going to need to know what the district is doing to protect their students. Also, they need to know where, they need to communicate who, when, and where to find that information, how that's going to go out. Is it going to be, I know both districts have a COVID page on their website, their school website, with different resources, but as information comes out, we need to know, we need to have that where parents are going to receive it. Clear direction in student handbooks, so that would actually have to be board approved on when to keep a student home and the process for notifying the district. And then again, procedures in place for common areas. And I think that's it.
All right. Sheila, thank you very much. And the rest of her team is on here also this morning. I want to just reiterate to everybody on the conference call, we've got over 100 folks here, that 29 of your peers are doing this work, and it's outstanding work. OSBA's at the table just because we're going to collect it and publish it for them and provide the means for them to meet and work and do this stuff. And again, instead of waiting until we're all done to get it up there, we're going to let you know what's going on as we go. So in 2 weeks, look for some more information on that. So Sheila, again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete, for everything you're doing.
So then the next thing I thought we would do this morning is we've got some of our districts are already starting to work on this stuff and figuring out what they want to do and starting to think about school. And this is a little bit different from the recommendations. We're going to bring you a set of recommendations on behalf of the task force, but I also wanted you to know in real time what some of the other districts in the state are doing. And so Tim Wagner, who's with Three Rivers Transportation, that's down in southwestern Ohio in Hamilton County. Tim, are you with us?
I'm here.
Super. I've asked Tim to spend a couple of moments talking about what he's doing in his district. And Tim, if you would tell us a little bit about how many buses, how many kids, and how big you are, and then tell me when to start clicking for you.
Okay, sounds good. We are sort of a unique situation, not completely unique. We are a district of about 2,400 students, but a third of the students go to private schools, and we do not have a single private school in our district. So about 2/3 of our buses run private schools as well as our school district. The other thing is we are a K-12 building. And my bus garage is literally on the campus. So in some ways that makes things a lot easier for us. But the private schools is a huge percentage of our transportation, and is going to be an issue this fall, I'm sure. We run 32 buses daily, and we have 7 vans that we also run for special needs. So that's a snapshot of who we are. So one of the things that when Pete asked me to talk about this, I thought about was last fall. Oh, go ahead, Pete. There you go. Last February, we had the flu run through our district big time. We at one point in time had almost 30% of our student population out. We ended up closing for 4 days by recommendation of the health department. And so that really sort of became a test run for what might happen in the fall in cleaning of the buses and all that. So one of my mechanics modified a backpack sprayer. And so every day we would spray down the buses. But as the flu was ramping up, the big issue, and we've already talked about it, is if this starts going through, we started losing drivers. I had drivers stepping out because their kids were sick. I had some older drivers who I'm pretty sure weren't sick, but were calling in because they just didn't want to take the risk. So I was actually very happy when we shut down for those 4 days, because I was getting to the point where I was not sure how we were going to deal with that. So that was sort of the test drive. And so it's given us a little insight as to what we might see this fall if things ramp back up. So what our response has been, we have a district COVID response team. And because we're a smaller district, I wear 3 hats. I'm the food service director and the facilities and operations director. So it's put me in a nice position for this, because I was able to start a COVID response team, and I am meeting weekly with each of the principals, our special ed coordinator, and our superintendent, and our athletic director. And if you guys, I would just encourage you, if you are not at that table, even if you have, if you're a bigger district and you have someone who's doing operations, and if they don't know the rules and regulations and laws that are in effect, I can't tell you how many times I have one of my principals say, well, what if we do this? And I say, great, I'll do anything I can, but state law prohibits this. Or, we were talking about changing all the start times. I said, that's great, but as of this point in time, as we know, the private schools dictate the times that I have, and because it's such a large percentage of who we are. So, and I know obviously there's politics and there's things involved, but if you're not at that table, I really encourage you to get there, because I think that's probably going to be the biggest impact we have, is not having the administrators writing a check that I can't cash. The other thing that we've done is we've intentionally, we've assumed the most restrictive environment. So we have already ordered masks, we've ordered face shields, and whether that's what we end up going with, we wanted to be prepared. The other thing is, tentatively, we are planning for students to wear masks and have hand sanitizers when they get on. Not sure if that plan will work or not. We're not sure what the school is going to ultimately require. But again, we want to start it with the most restrictive and go to the least restrictive. Then as we learned from the February outbreak, is foggers. So one of the things that we are, again, planning most restrictive is bringing in extra hours for my bus drivers. When the morning runs are done and the afternoon runs are done, they will be able to, we will disinfect the buses so that they're good to go for the next time. If there's enough time between a run and they're back at the bus garage, we'll also consider possibly spraying down between. Also remember, if you're not familiar with that, any disinfectant, any sterilizing agent has a certain amount of time it has to be left alone before it's effective. So, if it requires 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and you got, 3 minutes between runs, it's not worth your effort on that. Go ahead, Pete, next one. The other thing right now, we're sort of running 4 scenarios that we have, we haven't put every kid on a seat, but we've just sort of ballparked to see what we are. The first one is a normal day. That's easy enough because we are already doing that. Hey, Ark, I see the question on disinfectant. I have a company we use, and their disinfectants is like their own black label. But I know Doug had put together, and Doug, I don't know if that's on the website, but you had put together a whole list of, I don't hope I'm not jumping the gun here, but a whole list of different products that are CDC approved for stuff like this. So Doug might be able to get some of that information out to you guys. We have run a scenario of split days. So if we're coming in, half the group's coming in the morning or half is coming in the afternoon. There's some talk about our elementary school possibly running every day with half days. So we're sort of running, what does that look like? Of course, one of the discussions is alternate days where only half the kids are coming in any one day. And we have set up geographical zones. But in that, we didn't necessarily, because of the way our district is set up, we didn't necessarily say this half and that half, because we have some significant lower income areas. And if we transported all of those kids on one day, it would be a really rough day for the drivers and for the teachers. So we've looked at some sort of zones so that we balance out the classroom and the bus as well. And then what some of my administrators are talking about is they're calling the ABC schedule. Those kids who need daily instruction might be in the A group, or those kids whose parents are essential workers, they may come every day. The B group would then be kids whose parents don't want them in school. And so obviously I'm not going to transport them. And the C group would be alternate day kind of deal. That one scares me the most because it gets really complicated really quickly. But we have run some basic scenarios to see if it's even doable in our district. So the other thing I did was a survey of all my drivers. I asked 3 or 4 questions to try to get a feel for whether or not they are afraid of next year, if they have health concerns, if they have a family member. What I don't want is, 4 drivers on the first day of school saying, hey, we're quitting because we're afraid. So of my close to 40 drivers, I have 6 that I've identified as possible risks for not returning or for calling in a significant amount of time. And I have started a process of having conversations with them to see where they are. Yeah, I don't have it handy. I'll get that survey to Pete. And then you guys can take a look at it. It wasn't very complicated, but it was helpful. Then we also have a substitute plan. So we have the privilege of having some on-call drivers, and those are drivers who are contracted. They come in every day and they sit. But as you know, they rarely sit and they're on a route. All my van drivers have their CDLs and our bus drivers. So we have aides at the school. My secretary, I've got a couple other people that I can pull out of the school to hop on a van. They're not CDL drivers, they are just van drivers. But if I have to, I can pull my 7 van drivers into the buses. And then my mechanics, myself, and my router are all bus drivers as well. So, and then we have regular traditional subs that come in, and we've talked about having them, planning on them being ready to go. So we try to ramp up as many sub drivers as we can, because we learned in February we're gonna start losing drivers pretty quickly. And with if there's a 14-day quarantine, self-quarantine thing going on, you're gonna lose them for a while. Next one, Pete. All right, that's it. No, I think I got one more slide there. Yeah. The other thing that we're doing is right now, we haven't done it yet. We're developing a plan to Zoom some of our training. And some of that's going to be like the information we got earlier on how to assess and when to stay home and cleaning. And we're going to do all those. We're going to record those, and then we're going to place those up on YouTube. For the drivers who don't have that tech savvy level, they can either watch on their phones or click on the YouTube link, and then we're going to give them a short quiz based on stuff that we said during the session so that they can show that they actually watched the video. And then if we get down to a couple people who just don't know how to do computers at all, we'll bring them in on a case-by-case basis and have them watch the video at the school in the driver's lounge. So, and then the last thing, I think I got one more slide there, Pete, that I have been doing, and I know many of you have been doing, is we have to contact our state leaders. This is not something that they know anything about. When I contacted my reps and state senators, they had no idea that private schools dictate the starting times for public schools, at least in our district, because of the amount of private schools we have. So, and then we talked about the change in pre-service and being able to be a little more flexible in how we get our people trained. So those are the things that we've been doing. And, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I will get the survey questions to Pete and Doug, and then we can, they can send those out to you guys or put them on the website or whatever they want to do.
Tim, thank you very much for spending a couple minutes and telling us what you've been doing. And excuse me, it's always valuable, I think, for all of us to sit and listen to this. And something you said triggered a thought in my mind. We have administrators talking about taking different groups to school on different days. And, from a transportation standpoint, probably all of you are thinking, okay, I'll take the left side one day and the right side the other day. But we really do have to think about the socioeconomic zones in our districts and how do we avoid segregating students, if you will. That's always been something that the Big Eight have worried about a lot. But let's face it, it probably impacts all of us in every one of our districts. Can you imagine if you had to bus all the trailer parks on one day and all the apartments on the next day and all the mansions on the next day? That's probably not an environment that would work very well for anybody.
Well, I also imagine how many days people are going to call off sick on the day that it's the bad bus or the bad classroom, right? Yeah, I'm not feeling good today. Yeah, so it's going to be interesting how each of us manages those things, and it's something we're going to have to think about. All right, so Tim, thank you very much. And what I want to do is get our next guest in here. Dan Grothaus is with us. He is from St. Mary's School. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. So, how many slides do you have? Do you have my next slide there, Pete?
I do. Here we go.
Okay. What we're doing in St. Mary's is kind of a little bit of a wait and see at this point in time. But the superintendent and I have weekly discussions, daily discussions, just kind of throwing around ideas and keeping each other informed about what's going on out there. I'm pretty well the one that monitors the information from Department of Ed on transportation, the Department of Health, and the Governor's Office, and I monitor the CDC guidelines. And then obviously we do the drop-ins here every Wednesday and just work with OSBA for additional resources. And then here lately with bringing back sports and stuff, conversations with the AD kind of determine what is August going to look like, or July when we start 7-on-7s and golf starts, tennis starts. So kind of starting those discussions right now too to see what the sports are going to look like. Go ahead and go to the next one, Pete. But once we get a little more guidance, then locally we'll have the administrators, superintendent, Department of Health, if they're willing, and have more information too, to form a local task force about reopening. And that's just basically going to assure that we're all on the same page. One idea for working in the classroom may not necessarily work for transportation. But we've got a great relationship in this district where we all stay in communication with each other. And that's where we need to share our ideas, and what works for one may not work for the other and vice versa. So what may be a good education solution may be impractical for transportation. We're fortunate our one private school is within the district, and then our special ed programs are mostly housed in district, with one being in Walpock, which is only 7 miles away. So from our standpoint, it's very workable, but we all have to stay in touch. And our goal is to have a plan in place by July 1st. Hopefully optimistic that we can do that, but the guidance from Columbus is going to be key, and then working with our local health department. Next one. And like Tim had just mentioned, talking to your local legislators, share your concerns and thoughts. We're kind of on the edge of 2 Senate districts, so I've talked to both senators. We have 2 representatives that we split our districts, so I've talked to them. They're kind of on board with what we've been sharing too, that some of the logistic ideas for transportation are very complicated and challenging and not real workable. So they're taking our thoughts down to the General Assembly as well. But that's a big one. Let your legislators know what you're thinking. They don't always know how it works in the rural setting. So share your ideas, open their eyes, let them know how transportation works. And then our local health department right now, they're just waiting on guidance too, but we'll be working with them to develop plans. You know, our county's been pretty lightly touched by it. We have one county to our northwest that's only had 5 reported cases so far. So the rural settings are completely different than the urban settings in some other counties. So share your ideas, talk to your legislators, let them know, and just keep the lines of communication open. That's pretty well the short and simple of what we've been doing here. Kind of similar to what Tim's doing. Tim's put a little more on the routing side of things. We're just kind of taking a wait and see approach right now at this time.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
So let's see. In 2 weeks, we will bring you some reports from more districts so that you can get a sense of what those around you are starting to do. And you know, that's probably the $1 million question right now, is we can talk about what the guidelines are, what the recommendations are. I think the one given is that we're not going to see guidelines or direction coming until much later than each one of you needs it. Our routing subgroup thinks that really we need to push really hard to make sure that we have some kind of idea of what the fall is going to look like by July 1st. Because you absolutely have to have the time to do the routing, figure out which students are on the buses, get your routes put together, let the parents know. So there's a lot in front of us. I'm going to ask in our next meeting, I'm going to ask our staff training group to come online and spend a little bit of time with you. But one of the points they made on Monday for the task force, I think is extremely valuable. And that is, don't wait until August to start trying to figure out how to communicate with your driving team. Not everybody's tech savvy. And so if you're going to do driver training by Zoom or Google Chat or one of the Microsoft products, whatever you're going to do, it's probably time right now to start figuring out how to make that work. Bill Andexler shared with us, Bill's at Akron, he shared with us that he started meeting with his drivers throughout the summer, and it took Bill and his team almost 2 weeks just to iron out all the wrinkles to make sure everybody could get online. A number of districts have told us that they're opening up email addresses for all their drivers. That's kind of stuff you want to be thinking about now. If you wait until August, first off, your hands are going to be jammed full because you're going to be trying to figure out routes. And the second thing is, if you start communicating with your drivers now, starting to build their comfort about what's coming, maybe we can save a couple drivers that are on the cusp. They haven't decided if they want to come back or not. So I thought that was outstanding discovery and guidance by our task force members, and we'll bring you more of that in 2 weeks. So there's another thought I want to share with you. We're hearing about the AB schedules, about, 2 days a week, 2 days on, 2 days off. We're talking about alternate weeks. And then there's other schools that are talking about, we may have to change our eligibility policy. Maybe you're a K through 12 district right now, and you realize that in order to accommodate social distancing for the elementary kids, you can no longer bus your high school students. You need to be familiar with your school board's policy, and you may be making recommendations to your business manager or your treasurer or your superintendent. Transportation is an item that's included in school board policy. Some school boards have a generic policy, others have very specific policies. If your board's policy is detailed enough that it talks about which grades ride and what the walk distance to schools and stops is, you need to be very, very careful that you work with your superintendent, because the school board will have to make adjustments in their policy before you can make a change in the ridership. So here's another case where, and you heard it from Tim and you heard it from Dan, we want to make absolutely certain that everybody's communicating so that we keep on the same page and we don't have surprises. At the same time, I want you to think really hard about what is it that you need to help preserve your transportation capacity. Some of the recommendations that we shared with the legislature include, let's take a look at the out-of-district buses. Let's take a look at the buses where there's less than 15 to 20 children riding. It's kind of hard to explain to folks going to one of your own public schools why you can't send them a bus because you have to put 6 children on a bus that goes out of district. So we've talked about this many times over the last couple of years. There are some mandates in law that we have to deal with, and the only way those can go away is if we get the legislature to think about those things and perhaps waive them. Not necessarily forever, but at least for this year. And then the other thing that Greg Kelly is with us today. Greg Kelly sits on the routing team. He made a comment Monday in our meeting that, there's something else you got to think about. If you have to reroute in July and August just to get September going, when are they going to come back to you and say, okay, you need to put the routes back the way they were? And so, I think that's a really astute observation, that what we do in August and September, that's probably going to change again in January. It may even change again in March. And so flexibility is going to be critical. Just an observation, if you don't have routing software, now might be the time that you really wish you did have routing software, because I suspect routes are going to be very, very dynamic as we move into the new school year and continue through it. So thank you all for joining us today. Let's run through the chat box real quick here. We're going to get some information from Tim. We'll get the survey and we'll get that posted as a resource. Doug is working on a list of cleansers and sanitizers from EPA. As soon as the task force looks at that, we'll get it up on that research page. We had a follow-up question to the payment in lieu of. Somebody early on asked, can we prorate the payment in lieu of? And the answer is yes, you can. Then the follow-up question is, does that pertain to the 250 minimum, or if you pay more, does it apply to the more? Well, the answer is whatever dollar figure you as a district come up with your parents, that can be prorated. So, that there's no dollar figure assigned to that. And what the law says is you have to pay at least 250 for a full year. You can pay up to last year's average cost of transportation. So if you're somewhere in the middle, I'll just pick a number out of the air. If you're paying somebody $750 for the year, you prorate whatever that dollar figure is based on the number of days they attended school. Doug, any other questions that are sitting out there that we've left open? We will get information out to you about the next drop-in. Once again,
There's just one question, Pete. There's been some confusion over declaring impractical. Wanted to make sure that they got the words right from you today about what you declare a school or a student impractical.
okay. We actually talked about this. I don't know if it was the last drop-in or one before that. I will refer you back to those PowerPoints if you need to, because there's slides with bullet points on it. The whole notion of impractical is based in law. So you have to follow the way the law is written. It comes out of 3327.02. The essence of it is that as a school board, you can declare transportation impractical for a child. There's nothing in the law that says you can call a building impractical. It has to be done on a student by student basis. And so the order of events is very, very important. The first thing you have to do is, as an administrative team, you have to make a recommendation to your board. Your board has to pass a resolution, declares transportation impractical for a particular child. The names have to be listed in the resolution that's acted on by the board. Then you communicate with the parents of those children. You have to let them know that your board resolved it was impractical, and in exchange for that, you are offering them payment in lieu of transportation. And then the parents have the right to accept or reject that. And again, we've seen no relief from the legislature on that process this year. That's one of the reasons why we were suggesting to them, let's have a cutoff. If you have a bus, and our recommendation was if you have a bus with less than 20 children, that they can automatically be declared impractical. That has not been picked up by any legislators, not been put in a bill. So that's not the law. So we still have to manage it on a student by student basis. Somebody asks, is the family name listed in the board resolution or the full student name? You have to be able to identify that student in the resolution. So I would tell you the first and last name. ODE actually has some sample resolutions. We posted those on their website back when I was still with the agency. I'm pretty sure they're still posted there. If you can't find it there, send us an email. We can send you a sample resolution, but you do have to put the full student's name on there. Again, we would like to see some legislative relief. I don't know whether we're going to get it or not. Without that legislative relief, we're going to have to follow the processes as they're written right now. So I think that brings us to closure on what we discussed today. In 2 weeks, we'll meet again. We'll have some more district examples for you. We'll have some more reports out from the task force. Hopefully by then we have released the web page for the task force, and we'll start populating that. Again, I just want to tell you that task force, those are your peers. Those are 29 supervisors from around the state, and I applaud them and thank them for willing to roll up their sleeves, take a little bit of extra time, and work together to create some guidances. These guidances are dynamic. I doubt that anybody, even King Solomon's, going to come up with the right answer that works for everybody. What we have to do, and I like the line that both Maryland and CDC used. Look at all the guidances out there. Ultimately, what you'll have to do is what's practical and realistic for your own community. And I realize that doesn't spell it out in black and white what you do, and leaves things a little bit fuzzy around the edges. But that's what we're going to do. Sheila, I'm sorry, I don't have an email for King Solomon. Maybe we can figure that out. Someone else is asking if we'll get an update on what happens with Senate Bill 319 today. On the Ohio School Boards Association website, they do an update page. There's a link in the legislative section where they tell you what's going on with the bills. And so you can look there. soon as we know about anything being adopted, we'll get it out to the field through one of our Pupil Transportation updates. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Try not to get too hot in the sun, and we'll get an email out to let you know. As a reminder, our next session will be on June 24th at 10 a.m. Thanks. Have a great day.